This is Design Safe Radio, where natural hazards researchers strive to make our society more resilient to everything nature throws at us.
One of the things that data is being used for, though, is studies of the recovery of the whole marsh system. Because those marshes got impacted, they turned brown. They didn't actually have enough time to degrade that much before Delta, but they were dying. So a year later, how much protection would they provide for another hurricane? So I guess the deployment, that was a deployment covering many different disciplines, how the ocean's impacting the geotechnical properties in the marshes, the ecology of the marshes. By collecting those observations before the event and during the event, we have a baseline for looking at the recovery following the event. How long does it take those marshes to recover? What were the positives and the negatives of having a breakwater there? Hard gray infrastructure has benefits. It also has drawbacks.
Yeah.
So that was something that was highlighted, is that unintended consequence of having that water. The water took almost an extra week to drain from the area with the breakwater. So a lot longer inundation.
That sounds like a really good. I'm thinking back to another test at the Oregon State University facility of barrier islands, and they found kind of a similar thing of an unintended, not really a consequence, but a result of having a barrier island in front of a coastline is that the surge is actually intensified around the lee side or the opposite side of the waves from the island, and it took longer to drain out the other side. They were looking at tsunamis, I believe, rather than coastal storm surge. But any researcher listening, like, that'd be a great opportunity to use the data from this deployment and to do some lab testing on that to really study that further and see, is there a way to design a breakwater so that it still provides the protection during the storm, but doesn't have these unintended consequences afterwards?
No, that's really interesting you mentioned that, Dan, because there also are some studies with mangroves for protecting the shoreline, and they definitely dissipate the waves in the surge, which is protection for the inland areas. But there's some preliminary results, partly from lab studies, and some of these studies have been conducted at Oregon State, as you mentioned, suggesting that similarly they might trap water onshore. So
yeah,
it might be a trade of which is a bigger hazard, the waves in the surge or that longer lasting flooding.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually heading up there again to meet with Tori Johnson from the Naval Academy on Thursday.
Great. Tori is a NEER member, and so that's some of how I know about her work. Really exciting work.
Yeah, it's really, really amazing, and she's just such a fun person to talk to because she's just so passionate about it, and her team is fantastic.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to seeing the second round of testing that they're in the lab for.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned coordinating with the different elements of the NEER network a bit, during those deployments. So using the rapid resources, I'm imagining all of your data is going up to the Design Safe data depot, and I know a lot of the EERs coordinate on Slack. How do you guys coordinate with other elements of NEER? Are you talking to, for example, like the structural extreme events reconnaissance folks when you're looking at this particular section of the coastline and say, hey, it'd be great to look at the structures behind this part that we're already studying? Do you coordinate like that? How does that work?
Yes, we definitely coordinate. And I think that's one of the biggest efforts that we have found useful of NEERs, coordinating with all these different groups, because a lot of people are studying the impacts. So as you mentioned, we do use equipment from the rapid facility and coordinate with them. We also are participating on the Slack channels that the structurals group, the geotechnical group, other groups are on as well. There's wind engineering groups who are not necessarily coordinated through the NSF NEER, but they are also responding and participating on the Slack channels. And then there's some federal agencies that we coordinate with that aren't able to participate on the Slack. So I participate in the USGS has organized a federal storm team. They interact through daily conference calls when there's a major event. And I participate in the conference calls every day. And the goal there is to exchange information. So I let them know what's being talked about on Slack, what teams are responding, where they're responding, what type of equipment's being deployed. I learn from them what they're deploying, and then I share that back on Slack. So for instance, I mentioned the Hurricane Laura and Delta deployments. We deployed our cross-shore transects of instruments between the USGS does rapid deployments, and they have fixed locations where they deploy instruments. So we went between them to provide greater detail in an area that they weren't covering. And they're using that data from us to expand what they can learn, and we're using their data to give us a broader area. There were NOAA gauges offshore as well, so we're getting that information from the Federal Storm Team calls. NOAA does overflights before and after many of these big events. And again, we're exchanging that area with the NEER researchers, with the other teams. For the Hurricane Laura and Delta storms, the Structural Extreme Event Reconnaissance went out afterwards. We coordinated with them where they were going. They found some really interesting observations about 2 car garages versus 1 car garages that were relevant to what we had seen as far as the storm surge. So we interacted with them of that kind of information.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Design Safe Radio. Be sure to like and subscribe on whatever platform you happen to be listening to this on. It really helps people find our show. Thanks to our amazing sponsors, the National Science Foundation and the NERI Network Coordination Office, which is award number 2129782. Big thank you to Marty LaChance, our guest booker and topic researcher extraordinaire, and Raquel Ruiz, who is our video and audio editor. I'm your host and NERI Facility Scheduling and Operations Coordinator, Dan Zahner. We'll see you in the next episode. Until then, stay resilient.